The first thing Counselor Reth Vane noticed about the Velhari delegation was that their princess did not sit still. She moved through the reception hall at the Meridian Compact's diplomatic annex with the particular restlessness of someone accustomed to having the room reconfigure around her rather than the other way around. Taller than any human in the hall, silver-skinned with the faint luminescence that the briefing materials had described as a Velhari characteristic, with hair the color of deep space and eyes that shifted between violet and gray, depending on how the light caught them. Princess Sevahari Vel of the Velhari conclave made every other figure in the hall look like furniture that hadn't been asked. Reth was not furniture. He was, however, the most junior human diplomat on assignment to the annex, a cultural liaison, which was a polite way of saying that he explained human behavior to alien delegations without making either party feel stupid for not already knowing. His actual job title, which he had chosen himself on the intake form, was Cultural Interface Specialist, which sounded more impressive than it was. His role was stand in rooms and answer questions. He was good at it. His supervisor, Deputy Ambassador Kaur, had given him a single instruction before vanishing into a side meeting with the Velhari trade attachés. Keep her occupied. She asks a lot of questions. Answer them. Try not to make it weird. That had been 40 minutes ago. Reth stood at the refreshment table pretending to consider the selection of synthetic beverages. There were 11, and he had already decided on the second one, but hadn't picked it up yet because the table gave him something to do with his hands, when the princess appeared at his elbow. She did not approach in the way people approach when they want to start a conversation. She materialized. One moment the space next to him was occupied by a decorative plant that the annex apparently kept for species who found empty corners existentially troubling. The next moment it was occupied by the heir to the Velhari conclave, who was looking at him with the attentive precision of someone who had decided he was the most interesting problem in the room. "Cultural liaison Vane," she said. The translator node at her collar produced his title in standard with the slight half-second delay that meant the Velhari word for his role was something considerably more specific. The briefing materials had suggested the nearest translation was something like *person, who is paid to explain confusing people. He was choosing to consider that a compliment. "Your Highness." He turned and offered the small bow that the pre-mission briefing had indicated was appropriate. Not deep enough to be submissive, Velhari viewed excessive deference from junior staff as indicating their delegation had sent inadequate representatives, and not shallow enough to be disrespectful. He had practiced it 17 times on the transit shuttle and 3 times in the annex corridor this morning, which his bunkmate diplomatic attaché Yura had witnessed and mercifully refrained from commenting on. Her violet-gray eyes settled on him with an expression he was already learning to read as "You are the most convenient target in the room, and that is not a complaint." "I have a question," she said. "I would be surprised if you didn't," he said, and then immediately considered whether that had been too familiar. She blinked, a slow, deliberate single blink. In Velhari's social communication, the briefing materials had noted, a single slow blink indicated something close to that was unexpectedly candid, and I am adjusting my model of you accordingly. He had not expected to need that piece of information quite this early. "You are the one they have provided for questions," she said. "I am." "Good." She reached past him to the refreshment table without redirecting her gaze, a gesture of remarkable spatial awareness, given that she hadn't looked at the table once, and picked up a pale green cube that Reth suspected was synthetic citrus. She held it without eating it. Why do humans form lifelong bonds? Reth had been asked a great many questions in his 2 years as a cultural liaison. He had explained the human concept of humor to a Thressi delegation that communicated in harmonics, and found the idea of a non-informational statement delivered for social effect genuinely baffling. He had spent 4 hours walking a Keth ambassador through the logic of sports rivalries, not the appeal of athletic competition, which the Keth understood perfectly, but the phenomenon of choosing a team with whom you had no personal connection, and then experiencing genuine emotional investment in their outcomes over a period of decades. He had once diagrammed, on a cocktail napkin at a state dinner, the entire franchise structure of a human restaurant chain for a Galatian trade minister who had become convinced it was a religious institution, and had ended the explanation uncertain whether he had clarified anything or simply confirmed the minister's suspicions. He had not been asked this question before. "Could you narrow it down slightly?" he said. "Lifelong bonds covers a fairly broad category of human behavior." She turned to face him more directly. Among Valhari, the briefing materials had noted, turning one's full face toward an interlocutor indicated serious attention. It was the equivalent of leaning forward, of signaling that this was not a casual exchange but a genuine inquiry that warranted real engagement. "I have reviewed your species' cultural records," she said. "Extensively during transit, your people form bonds with chosen partners, permanent bonds, not seasonal arrangements, not resource allocation partnerships, not solely for reproduction, though reproduction is sometimes an element. You pair with individual people, and you remain paired until one of you reaches biological termination." "Death," he said. "Until death," she agreed, the translator rendering it with a flat precision that somehow made it land heavier than either word alone. This is not a standard adaptive strategy. Among Valhari, bonds are seasonal and renegotiated at regular intervals. Partners are reassessed against current circumstances, and dissolution is routine when the functional match has shifted. Among the Thressi, bonds are task-specific and dissolve when the purpose that generated them has been fulfilled. Among the Keth, there are no exclusive bonds at all. The entire concept is considered a category error. But humans, she paused, in a way that suggested she had considered the next words carefully, form bonds that they intend to maintain until death. Even knowing death will come, even in full awareness that the loss will be significant. Even when the rational calculus would suggest the resource allocation is poor. She looked at the green cube in her hand as if she had only just noticed she was holding it. "I want to understand why." The reception hall hummed warmly around them. Near the far wall, Deputy Ambassador Kaur was being talked at by 2 Valhari trade attachés simultaneously, and managing it with the particular diplomatic composure of someone who had long since made peace with his circumstances. The artificial lighting approximated the warm gold spectrum that most humanoid species found calming, which meant the room felt persistently like late afternoon, even at what was technically mid-morning station time, and everyone in it was consequently a little relaxed in ways they might not have been able to explain. Reth set down his synthetic beverage. "That," he said, "is going to take more than a standing conversation." She looked at him, the slow single blink again. "Then we should sit," she said. They found a side alcove set with a low table and 2 seats designed for bipedal species with approximately human proportions, which meant Sevahari's longer legs required a slight adjustment of posture. She managed this without apparent awkwardness, the fluid adaptation of someone who had spent a lifetime occupying spaces not built to her specifications and had long since stopped considering it a problem. Reth sat across from her and spent a moment organizing his thoughts, which was not a thing he usually needed to do. He had explained human culture in pieces, in fragments, in the particular way you explain things when you're not sure which part of it is confusing. He had explained humor and sports rivalries and restaurant franchises. He had explained holidays and names and the human relationship to time, which the Keth had found baffling in a completely different direction than the Thressi. He had not before now been asked to explain the whole center of it. "All right," he said, "the short answer first, then the real one." "I prefer the real one," she said without hesitation. I know, but the short answer is useful context. He settled into the chair. It was slightly too low for comfortable conversation across the table, which was a design choice he had never understood about diplomatic furniture. The short answer is that humans are physiologically built for long-term pair bonding, neurologically. When humans form a close, lasting bond with a partner, it produces measurable changes in brain chemistry, immune function, cortisol regulation, pain tolerance, and emotional baseline. The bond is, in a strictly biological sense, good for us. We are demonstrably better at surviving physically and psychologically with a chosen long-term partner than without one. Sevahari absorbed this, so it is adaptive. Yes, but that's not why we do it, and it's not what makes it what it is. She tilted her head, a small, precise angle that his briefing materials had not covered, but that he was interpreting as continue. Why do you do it then? Reth was quiet for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer. He had known the answer for a long time, had lived it in his family, had seen it in the people around him, had carried it as a fact the way you carry something that has always been true before you ever had words for it. The pause was because he was trying to find the version that would land correctly, the version that would translate. Tell me something, he said. Have you ever been in a situation where things were going badly, where you were in genuine danger, or lost, or simply overwhelmed, and someone came back for you? Not because they were obligated to, not because the situation required it or the protocol demanded it or the math supported the decision, just because you were the person they had chosen and they weren't going to leave you there. She studied him. The violet in her eyes had shifted to something deeper, which the briefing materials had associated with focused, careful attention, the color of a mind that had decided to take a question seriously. No, she said. Velhari do not operate that way. A partner who placed themselves at greater risk to retrieve you from a situation you had entered would be considered poorly calibrated, emotionally overinvested in a way that compromised rational function. Right. He leaned forward slightly, bracing his forearms on the low table. So I want you to imagine something for me. Imagine that you don't have that framework. You don't know that that's the evaluation. Imagine that you're in the worst moment of your life, trapped somewhere, or injured, or surrounded, or simply running out of time in a way that has no good resolution, and a door opens. And on the other side of that door is someone who did not have to open it, who had every practical reason to leave it closed, whose situation would have been better by measurable metrics if they had walked away. He paused. Let that sit for a second. And they opened it anyway, because you are on the other side. He looked at her. What does that do to you? She was very still. He was beginning to understand, a significant tell. In the 40 minutes since the delegation had arrived, Sevahari Vel had not been still once. She had moved through the reception hall with restless intelligence, examining things, adjusting her position, redirecting her attention. She was a person who inhabited her surroundings actively. When she became still, it meant something had stopped her. It would be, she paused. The translator delay was longer than usual, which he was taking to mean that she was choosing the Velhari word carefully, and the system was working to find a standard equivalent. Significant. It would reorder things. Yes, he said, that's the bond, that's the whole thing at its core. He thought about how to say it cleanly. A lifelong human bond is an agreement that is never formally stated and is never contractualized. What it actually is, what humans are agreeing to when they choose a partner and commit to them for life, is this. I will come through the door. That's it. The whole of it. When humans bond with someone for life, what they are choosing is the person they believe will open that door for them, and the person for whom they will open it, without calculation, without first running the numbers, regardless of what it costs. Sevahari looked at him for a moment that felt longer than it was. But you cannot know, she said slowly. At the time of bonding, you cannot know if the person will actually do this. You have not yet reached the moment. You are choosing based on what? Projection. Pattern reading, hope. All of those things, he agreed. And you're right that you can't know for certain, not in advance. Then how do you choose? That, he said, is the question humans spend most of their lives trying to answer. She was quiet. Her fingers had closed around the green cube, not holding it up, just resting it in her palm, and she was looking at a point past his shoulder in a way that he thought meant she was processing rather than distracted. The Velhari system, she said finally, without looking at him, eliminates this problem by eliminating the long-term commitment. If bonds are seasonal and renegotiated, you are never in the position of having chosen incorrectly for life. The adjustment period is built in. There is no irreversible error. That's true, he said. But there is also no, she stopped, restarted. There is also never a moment in which someone opens a door for you because you are the person they chose. He didn't say anything. He let it land where it was going to land. She set the green cube on the table. She had still not eaten it. Tell me more, she said. He told her more. He told her about the architecture of human attachment, the way it developed in layers over time, the way it was built not from a single declaration, but from the accumulation of small decisions. He told her about the human distinction between love as a feeling and love as a practice, that feelings, over any extended period of time, would fluctuate, that the thing that distinguished a permanent bond from a long-term temporary one was the decision, made and remade, to stay. Not because staying was always the comfortable choice, because it was the chosen one. He told her about loss, which she had not asked about but which he felt was necessary to include. He told her that human bonds were permanent in intention, but that permanence was frequently interrupted by death, which arrived on no particular schedule and did not negotiate. That the human practice of forming lifelong bonds existed in full knowledge that the bond would, eventually, be broken by time. That humans knew this and did it anyway, and that this was not irrational. That the majority of humans, asked whether they would choose a shorter life with the bond over a longer life without it, would choose the shorter one. Sevahari had stopped him on that point. You would choose, she said, and her voice had something careful in it, a greater loss at a later time in order to have the thing in the interim. Yes, he said. This is considered rational by humans. It's considered the only way to have a real life, he said. Not everyone would put it that way, but most would agree. She had been quiet for longer than usual after that. At some point, he hadn't noticed exactly when, a member of the annex staff had appeared with a tray of actual food, rather than synthetic cubes and small decorative beverages. Reth had thanked them without interrupting the conversation, and worked his way through something that resembled a pressed grain and protein sandwich while continuing to talk, because he had not eaten since the transit shuttle and his body was beginning to register the oversight in ways that were mildly distracting. Sevahari had taken nothing from the tray. He noted this and did not comment on it. The briefing materials had mentioned that Velhari did not typically eat in formal or semi-formal conversational contexts with non-Velhari, which was a cultural norm rooted in something involving the social significance of shared meals that he intended to ask about when the current conversation had reached a natural pause, which it showed no signs of doing. He told her about the third reclamation unit, which was not a standard cultural liaison topic, but which had come up because she had asked about the limits of the bond, whether humans maintained it under extreme duress, or whether it was a peacetime aspiration that collapsed when circumstances became genuinely costly. There was a 6-person tactical unit, he said, operating under adverse conditions, outnumbered, cut off from their primary extraction point, taking significant fire. Standard protocol in that situation is to advance toward the objective. You do not stop for casualties. The mission calculus does not support it. "This is rational," she said. Yes, the third member of the unit was hit early in the engagement. Severe injury. The other 5 could have reached the extraction point and completed the mission. They would have lost one person and completed the objective. By every metric available to them at the time, that was the correct decision. What did they do? They stopped. He paused. All 5 of them stopped. 2 provided suppressing fire to create space, 2 carried the injured soldier, 1 took point and cleared the route. It took them 3 times as long to reach extraction. They nearly didn't make it out at all. 3 more were wounded before they cleared the engagement zone. He watched her. But they got there, all 6 of them, and when they were debriefed afterward, the unit commander was asked why they had deviated from protocol. She said, and this is a direct quote because it was logged, "We don't leave people." That was her entire explanation. 3 words. The after-action review board accepted it. SciFi had looked at him for a long, still moment. "This is not rational," she said. "The math does not support it. 5 people risked themselves for the continuation of one who was already severely compromised. The mission objective was deprioritized. From a resource allocation standpoint." "Yes," he said. "From a resource allocation standpoint, it was the wrong call. Every calculator in every language would tell you that. But they did it." "They would always do it," he said. "That's what I'm trying to explain. The bond isn't a preference that is weighed against other preferences when circumstances change. It's prior to the weighing. It's the thing that comes before the calculation, not after it. When that unit stopped for their injured soldier, they weren't making a choice in that moment. They were expressing something that had already been decided, long before the engagement, simply by having been a unit together. We don't leave people. It wasn't a decision. It was a statement of fact about who they were." She was quiet for a long time. The afternoon light in the alcove, still that warm, steady gold, had not changed. But the reception hall beyond their alcove had thinned out, the initial reception period giving way to the pre-scheduled introductory briefings. Somewhere distant, voices were conducting diplomacy in an organized way. In here, something else was happening, and Reth was not entirely certain what it was, except that it felt like it mattered. "Why?" she said. The question was quieter than the earlier ones. It had a different quality, less the inquiry of someone seeking analytical understanding, and more the question of someone who had arrived at the edge of something and was looking over. "Why?" he repeated. "Why is the bond prior to the calculation? Why build a civilization around refusing to leave people when the math does not support it? Why?" She stopped. Her eyes were on the table, not unfocused, but directed inward, following something he couldn't see. "Why is we don't leave people a sufficient explanation for a review board? Why is it sufficient for anyone?" He thought about it. He thought about how to say it in a way that would cross the distance between what he understood bone deep and what she had never been taught to feel. "Because," he said slowly, "the alternative is a world in which you are always alone, even in company, even with a partner beside you, even with a unit around you. If the bond is always conditional, if there is always a threshold, always a point at which you become expendable because the math shifts, then you are never truly held. You are tolerated until the calculation changes. You are kept until you are no longer worth the cost." He met her eyes. And humans, as a species, decided that this was not acceptable, decided it, built civilization around it, built the bond around the refusal to accept it. We don't leave people is the whole foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. SciFi Vel, princess of the Velhari conclave, looked at him across the low table of a diplomatic alcove, surrounded by the quiet hum of the station and the distant sounds of organized diplomacy and the utterly consistent warm afternoon light. She said nothing at all. He watched her. He had expected a response, another question, another point of analytical engagement, another "this is not rational" that he would address. Instead, she was simply still. The most still he had seen her, across the 2 hours they had been sitting here. Her hands were in her lap and the green cube she had picked up 2 hours ago was still on the table, untouched, and her eyes had gone fully gray, which the briefing materials had not covered, but which he thought, looking at her, meant something that was not in any briefing material, because it had not been there to observe before now. Something had landed. He didn't know what to do with it exactly. He waited. "My counselor," she said finally, "is going to be looking for me." "Probably," he agreed. She stood, smoothing the front of her formal diplomatic attire with a gesture that was entirely composed. Whatever had passed across her face a moment ago had been filed somewhere internal, held with the careful Velhari restraint that he was beginning to understand was not coldness but its opposite, the way you hold something tightly because you know it can be dropped. "I have more questions," she said. "I figured," he said, and stood as well. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll be here," he said. She left the alcove without the particular royal efficiency he might have expected. She left it slowly, which he noticed, and which he thought probably meant something, and which he was going to think about later. The formal reception dinner that evening placed Reth at the secondary table, junior diplomatic staff, no distinguished guests, a position that had never previously felt notable. He sat beside Attaché Yura, who was reviewing something on a data slate, and eating with the absent efficiency of a person who had learned to treat meals as logistical operations, and worked his way through something described as a vegetable dish that tasted like the concept of a vegetable rather than the experience of one. He was halfway through it when he became aware that he was being observed. Princess Sevahari, at the main table, was not engaged in conversation with either the deputy ambassador on her left or the chief counselor on her right. Both were occupied core with the trade attaché, the counselor with his notes. In the gap, she was looking across the room. At him. He met her gaze, offered a small, questioning tilt of his head. "Can I help you without words? The universal diplomatic shorthand for I notice you are looking at me, and I am open to knowing why." She looked away, directed her attention to the counselor, said something that appeared to conclude whatever he was reviewing. Reth looked back at his vegetable dish, ate the rest of it without tasting it. At the reception following dinner, the senior delegates arranged themselves in the choreographed orbits of diplomatic socializing, while the junior staff clustered in the social permission zones allocated to them, which were near the refreshments and the windows and generally out of the way. Reth found himself near a window that looked out over the station's observation ring, a long arc of artificial stars against deep black, and somewhere in the lower curve of it, the pale outline of the planet below, and was in the process of considering whether to get another drink or simply continue holding his current empty glass when Sevahari appeared. She did not approach, she materialized. The same way she had appeared at his elbow in the reception hall that morning. One moment the space beside him was empty, the next it was not. "You didn't finish your explanation," she said. "Good evening, Your Highness." A pause, something that was almost a reset. "Good evening," she said, with the slight, precise intonation of someone who had noted the correction and filed it. "You didn't finish." "I thought I had," he said. 2 hours is usually sufficient for most cultural explanations." "You explained what the bond is," she said. She was looking out at the stars, not at him, which he was learning meant she was considering something she wasn't certain how to frame. "You explained why humans value it. You explained the mechanism and the history and the cost." A pause. "You didn't explain how it begins. The formation of it." No, she was still looking at the stars. The planet below had rotated enough that its lit side was visible now, pale green and brown, cloud-wrapped, turning with the patient indifference of very large things. "I mean," she stopped. In the 2 hours he had spent with her, she had not stopped mid-sentence once. She was precise. She constructed sentences fully before releasing them. "I mean, how does a human know when they have found the person, the specific one, the one they will open the door for?" He turned slightly to look at her. Her profile against the stars was composed in the formal sense. The Velhari composure that he had been rereading all day, that he understood now, was not absence of emotion, but the very careful architecture of its containment. "I don't think you always know in advance," he said. "I think a lot of the time you find out during the hard part, during the moment when the door is actually in front of you and you have to decide." He thought about it. Some people find out that what they thought was a bond was conditional, that when the moment arrived, the calculation won. And some people surprise themselves. They stand at a door they didn't know they were going to open, and they open it, and they find out in the opening what the bond actually is. She was very quiet. "And if the other person doesn't see it?" she asked. "If they don't know that you've already gone through. If you've been standing at the door and opening it in ways that aren't visible yet." He held very still. "Then you tell them," he said, "when you can." She turned to look at him then, full face attention, fully directed, the Velhari signal of serious engagement. And the starlight caught the silver in her hair and the shifting gray of her eyes, and he was aware, with a clarity that he had not entirely been prepared for, that they were no longer talking about the species. They stayed at the window for another hour. They talked about other things, the diplomatic sessions, the technical review scheduled for the following morning, the station's history as a neutral meeting point for delegations that would not otherwise share atmospheric space. The conversation was ordinary in the way that conversations are ordinary when the thing that matters most is simply that they are continuing, that neither party is walking away. When the reception ended and the delegations dispersed to their quarters, Reth walked back to the junior staff section with the empty glass he had never refilled, and the clear, steady certainty that something had changed, and the equally clear certainty that he was not yet sure what to do about it. He had been a cultural liaison for 2 years. He had explained human things to non-human people many times in many rooms. He had never before explained something and felt, in the explaining, that he was also describing a situation he was currently in the middle of. He lay awake for a while that night thinking about it, and then he stopped thinking about it and simply held the feeling, the way you hold something real. The following morning, the joint technical review of the trade protocol annexes ran for 3 hours and produced approximately 11 minutes of actual substance, the rest being the procedural ritual that gave all parties a documented record of having been present and engaged. Reth's role was minimal. Cultural interpretation queries rarely arose during tariff schedule discussions, and he spent most of the session paying about 70% of his attention to the proceedings and directing the other 30% toward nothing in particular while it figured things out. At the break, he was in the corridor outside the meeting room filling a water container from the service station when she appeared. "I want to understand something else," she said. "Good morning, Your Highness." The pause, the slight recalibration. Good morning. More natural than yesterday, he thought. "I want to understand something." "All right. You said humans find out what they are during the moment." She was standing with the same precise attention she had brought to every conversation, but something in her posture was different from the day before, slightly less formal, slightly more directed. What if someone is afraid? What if they are standing at the door and they can feel what it will cost, and they do not know if they are the kind of person who opens it? What if they have never been asked to before? He looked at her for a moment. "Then they're standing exactly where every human has stood at some point," he said. "That's not a deficiency. That's the condition. The door is scary because the person on the other side matters. If they didn't matter, there would be nothing to be afraid of." "But how do they decide?" "They decide that the person is worth being afraid for." He said it simply because it was simple, even though it wasn't easy. That's the whole calculation. Not is this worth the cost, because you usually can't answer that cleanly, but is this person worth the cost? And if the answer is yes, you open the door. She was looking at him with an expression that he had no briefing material for, something that was neither the analytical precision of the reception hall nor the careful containment of the evening window, something that was working toward the surface. "And if the other person does not know you are standing there," she said, "if they don't know that you are already considering the cost, already asking the question, you tell them," he said again, "when you're ready." She held his gaze. He held hers. The corridor around them continued its business, delegates and staff and aides moving between rooms, carrying documents, exchanging low, urgent words in multiple languages, conducting the 10,000 small transactions of organized diplomacy. None of them appeared to notice that two people had become very still in the middle of it. "Cultural liaison vein," she said. "Your Highness, I have been asking you about human bonding for some time now. About 18 hours in total." Yes, a pause that was very precisely timed. "My counselor has noted that I have spent an excessive amount of time with the junior human diplomatic liaison and suggested that I refocus my attention on the primary sessions." "That seems like sound advice." "It is." Her voice carried something dry and clean there and gone. "I have not taken it." He held very still. "I notice," she said carefully, "that I have been asking you about the bond because I wanted to understand it. And I noticed that somewhere in the asking, I stopped wanting to understand it abstractly." The corridor continued around them. Someone with a data tablet walked past, swerved slightly without looking up, kept going. "Sevahari," he said. She registered the shift, the absence of the title. Something in her expression changed in a way he had no vocabulary for, but recognized immediately. The way you recognize something you have been looking for without knowing you were looking. "I want to be accurate about what I'm understanding right now," he said. "Because I am junior diplomatic staff, and you are the heir to the Velhari conclave, and there are a number of ways I could be misreading a situation I am inclined to want to read correctly." She looked at him with an expression that contained, unmistakably, something very close to the Velhari equivalent of "you are being careful when the careful part is over." "You are not misreading it," she said. He breathed. "All right," he said. "Then I need to say something, and I want you to tell me if the framework makes sense." "Yes. I have been explaining the bond to you for 18 hours, he said, "and around hour 2, I stopped explaining it abstractly." She did not move. She did not blink. The full weight of her attention was on him, violet gray and unwavering. "I think I am standing at a door," he said, "and I know what's on the other side of it, and I know what it will cost, and I am figuring out whether I am the kind of person who opens it." The corridor was very loud around them, in the specific way corridors are loud when you stop hearing them. "You are," she said. Her voice was different now, the precision still there, every word chosen, but behind it something had released, like a structure that had been under tension for longer than it needed to be finally able to rest. "I think you have already opened it. I think you opened it some time ago, and you are only naming it now." He exhaled. "That's the other thing about the bond," he said. "Sometimes you find out you're already in it." "Yes," she said, and almost smiled, which was the most extraordinary thing he had seen in the corridor. There were 12 more days in the diplomatic session, and Reth spent most of them conducting his actual job with slightly less than his full professional attention, which he noted internally and did not particularly regret. They talked every day. In the formal briefings, in the side alcoves, in the observation ring corridor after the sessions ended. She asked about his family. He told her about his mother, who was an engineer working on habitat construction on a mid-rim world. His father, who had retired from the diplomatic service and was now teaching a cultural history course that he took extremely seriously. His younger sister Marin, who had recently bonded with her partner, in a ceremony that the entire family had attended, and that Reth had found, in the careful privacy of the moment, genuinely moving in a way he was still processing. Sevahari listened with an attentiveness that he was learning to recognize as something distinct from Velhari formal attention, something that was hers specifically, the quality of a person who was listening not to gather data, but to understand. She asked, "What did your sister feel when she chose?" He thought about Marin, about the look on her face during the ceremony, not the performance of it, but the private moment he'd caught between songs when she looked at her partner across the room, with an expression that had nothing performed in it at all. That was purely the look of someone who had found the place they were going to build from. "Relief," he said. "I think the word she would use is relief." Like she'd been carrying a question, and she finally knew the answer. Sevahari held that for a long time. She asked, "What did your family feel when she told them?" He thought about that too. "My father cried," he said. "My mother was pleased in the way she's pleased when something she knew was going to work out has worked out. And I felt like something had been completed, like a sentence that had been building for years had finally ended." He paused, and then immediately started a new one. She looked at him with something he had stopped trying to classify, and had simply started receiving. On the 9th day, the technical sessions concluded. The afternoon was given to unstructured diplomatic socializing, the kind of gathering that served important relationship maintenance functions, and that everyone in it would have been happy to see replaced with scheduled recreation time. Reth was with a group of junior staff from 3 delegations, conducting the social minimum competently, when Sevahari's chief counselor appeared beside him. The counselor was a compact figure with the gray-silver coloring of an older Velhari, and the expression of someone who had strong professional opinions about the situation, and had been paid to keep them organized rather than expressed. "The princess," he said in a tone of precise minimum audibility, "requests your presence. At your earliest convenience." The conversation around Reth very briefly paused in a way that no one acknowledged. "Of course," Reth said. The observation deck was accessible only to senior delegation members. The fact that Reth's annex clearance had been quietly adjusted to permit his access was something the counselor had arranged and clearly had feelings about, all of which remained professionally contained. She was at the rail when he arrived. The deck had the best view on the station, the full visible arc of space, no structural obstructions, just the stars and below them the slow rotation of the planet, which was currently showing its inhabited continent in the warm light of its star. 12 days, she said when he joined her. 12 days. The delegation returns tomorrow. I know. She was looking at the planet. Her profile had the stillness he had learned to read as deep processing, the most thoughtful version of her, the one that appeared when something genuinely mattered. "I asked you why humans form lifelong bonds," she said, "and you told me, and in the telling I understand now what the answer is." She paused. "But I did not ask when I asked whether such bonds could form across the space between species." He was quiet. "I have reviewed the archive," she said, "more carefully than I reviewed it before in the days since. Human Velhari pairs exist. They are rare, the social structures do not make it simple, my people's bonding customs and human ones do not map neatly, and there are political dimensions that my counselor has expressed views about at length. A breath, clean and even. But they exist, and I found in reviewing them that none of them were simple. None formed because the circumstances were convenient. Everyone formed because someone went through a door," he said. "Yes." The station hummed around them. Below, the continent on the planet below was lit soft gold in its star's afternoon. "Sevahari," he said. She turned to look at him. "I'm not going to tell you that this doesn't have complications," he said. "It has significant ones. Practical ones. The kind that would fill a meeting and probably do somewhere on a regular basis." He held her gaze. But I have spent 12 days explaining to you why humans form lifelong bonds. And the honest answer, the real one, is that we form them because we find someone and we decide that the complicated part is worth it. Worth the fear. Worth the door. He paused. And I would like, with your permission, to find out if we can be that for each other. She looked at him for a long moment. He had learned, across 12 days, to read the architecture of her composure, not as distance, but as care. Velhari held things tightly because they had been taught that tight holding was the only safe holding, and that the alternative was the loss that came with the renegotiated bond, the seasonal dissolution, the efficient redistribution of something that could not actually be efficiently redistributed. What crossed her face now was not composure. What crossed her face was the thing that composure had been containing. "I told you," she said quietly, "that I did not know if I was the kind of person who opens the door, that the Velhari system does not require it, that I had never been tested." "You did." "I want you to know," she stopped, began again more carefully. "I want you to know that I am aware I have been standing at the door for some days now. I have been aware of the cost and the fear and the fact that my counselor's opinions are extensive and that the practical dimensions are real and that I do not have a Velhari framework for what I am considering." Her eyes on his were steady and very clear. "And I notice that I am not leaving." He breathed. "Then you're already through it," he said. She looked at him. The violet had come back into her eyes, or perhaps it was the light, the warm gold of the station's artificial afternoon, finding a color he hadn't seen in her before. Something that was neither gray nor violet but both at once, something that was the color of a question that had just become an answer. "I am trying," she said, "to form a bond." "So am I," he said. "I am told it is complicated." "It is," he agreed. "It is also," he said, "the only thing humans have ever found that was worth the complicated part." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she did something he had not seen her do before, a small, precise, real smile that had nothing formal in it at all. It arrived and departed quickly, but it had been there, and they both knew it had been there. "Your species," she said, "is very strange." "We are," he agreed. "We also make excellent counselors feel very burdened. I want to apologize in advance for the paperwork." This time the smile stayed slightly longer. The delegation departed the following morning. Reth stood on the boarding platform while the departure procedures were conducted with Velhari efficiency. Everything organized, everything on time, the counselor moving with the quiet purpose of someone whose considerable professional opinions had been noted and processed, and were now manifesting as exceptional logistical management. Before she boarded, Sevahari crossed the platform to where he was standing. Her counselor, 3 meters away, looked at the middle distance with the determined composure of his entire career. "Cultural liaison vein," she said, "formal for the platform, for the record." "Your Highness," he said. She held out a folded document. Actual physical document, not a data file, Velhari formal communication. The kind that was kept and archived and carried meaning by virtue of its form. "I have filed a cultural exchange request through the Compact's official channels," she said. "It is under my name and the Velhari Conclave seal. It requests an extended cultural liaison assignment to the Conclave's secondary diplomatic station, lasting 8 months with option for extension." He took the document. "I am told," she said, still formal, still for the record, "that the appropriate human response to this kind of communication is to read it carefully and consider it thoroughly." "That is the appropriate response," he said. "Good." A pause. "Read it carefully." She walked back to the boarding line, said something brief to her counselor who did not visibly react, and boarded the shuttle. Reth read the document. It was a formal cultural exchange request, exactly as described in both Velhari and Standard. At the bottom, below the official seal, was a handwritten addition in Standard. She had written it in her own hand, which was how he knew it had been added after the official document was prepared. Reth, you asked whether it was possible to find out, during, what you are made of. I found out something, in these 12 days. I found out that I have been standing at the door for some time without calling it that. I found out that my people's system, which is efficient, has not prepared me for the feeling of deciding that the cost is worth it, because it never asks you to make that decision. It removes the decision by removing the thing that requires it. I do not want to remove the thing. I am asking you to come to the conclave's secondary station. I am asking through official channels, which my counselor has documented thoroughly and has opinions about. I am asking because this is the first time I have understood why humans build what they build, and because I have found that understanding it and experiencing it are different things, and because I would like to experience it further with you. I am not certain I know how to do this correctly. I have no Velhari framework for it. But I notice I am not afraid of that the way I expected to be. Sevahari. He folded the letter and placed it in his interior pocket, where he was fairly certain it would remain for a very long time. He watched the shuttle's running lights until they disappeared against the station's dark hull. He stood there a moment longer. Then he took out his communicator and wrote his reply. He wrote 3 versions. Erased the first 2 because they were too careful. Sent the third one without rereading it, because he had decided some time ago, probably in the alcove, at hour 2, when she had set down the green cube, that he was the kind of person who opens the door. Sevahari. I read it carefully. You are already doing it correctly. The Velhari framework isn't a prerequisite, it's a structure you build after, not a condition you require before. You stood at the door and you didn't leave. That is all the framework you need to start. I'm filing the reciprocal assignment request today. My supervisor will have questions. My supervisor's supervisor may also have questions. I am going to answer them all and then file the paperwork anyway. I told you that humans form lifelong bonds because they find someone worth the complicated part. Come pick up the request confirmation when it clears the system. I'll send it as soon as I have it. Reth asterisk. He sent it. Above the station's hull, the shuttle carrying her grew small and then smaller, until it was only a point of light that might have been any other star. And then it was gone, but gone was not the same thing as lost, and the Velhari Conclave's secondary diplomatic station was not so far that a door, once opened, could not be kept open. He had spent 12 days explaining the bond to a princess who could not understand it. He had not expected to find out in the explaining that he had already started building one. But that was what he had told her, that you don't always know in advance. That sometimes you find out during. That sometimes someone asks you a question and the answering changes both of you, and you stand on a boarding platform with a folded letter in your pocket and a clear, settled feeling, not uncomplicated, not without cost, but real the way only real things feel, which is to say, held. We don't leave people. He had said that to her, explaining the 3rd reclamation unit, in the context of a tactical debrief that had become something else. He had said it as a fact about his species. He understood now that he had also been saying it about her, that somewhere in the explaining, without the benefit of a ceremony or a declaration or a season's end renegotiation, it had become something he meant. He went back to his desk and started on the paperwork. End. Epilogue, 8 months later. The Velhari Conclave's secondary diplomatic station was smaller than the Meridian Annex and considerably colder, because the Velhari ran their environmental systems at temperatures calibrated for their own physiology, which was 4 degrees lower than the human comfort range. Reth had been informed of this in his assignment briefing and had brought adequate layering. He had also been informed that the cultural liaison position was newly created, that he would be the first human to occupy it, and that the station's senior diplomatic staff had varying levels of enthusiasm about the arrangement, ranging from skeptical tolerance to what his supervisor had diplomatically described as *active reservation. He had been on the station for 7 months now. The senior diplomatic staff had, on balance, adjusted. He was in the station's main hall, reviewing the agenda for the following week's trade consultations, when Sevahari appeared, not materializing this time, because she had stopped materializing after approximately the 3rd week, when it had become clear that the materializing was a formal behavior she maintained with people she was uncertain about, and she was no longer uncertain about him. She simply walked in, the way a person walks into a room where someone they know is working. "There is a situation," she said. He looked up from the agenda. "What kind?" "The kind my counselor is handling," she said, which meant it was significant enough to require the counselor but not significant enough to require her direct involvement, which was the category of situation that the counselor was most competent to address and least pleased to receive. "I am free for the next hour." "I was reviewing the trade agenda." "It can wait an hour." He set down the agenda. She sat across from him, and the familiar quality of her attention settled into the room, not the formal Velhari attentiveness of the reception hall at the Meridian Annex, a year ago now, but the particular quality of the attention he had come to know as hers specifically. The one that was listening not to gather data, but because the thing being said mattered. "I want to tell you something," she said. "All right." She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that contained something being shaped. "I spoke with my counselor this morning, before the situation arose. I have been speaking with him about what we are doing, what I am doing, whether it is sustainable is the word he uses, viable, within a framework that the conclave can recognize and accommodate." "What did he say?" "He said," she paused, the dry thing came and went. "He said that he has reviewed all available precedent, and that in his assessment, the arrangement is irregular, and that he has concerns, and that his concerns have been noted in 3 separate filed communications. And she said, he said that in his further assessment the arrangement is functional, that it is working, that whatever he expected a year ago, he did not expect it to work as well as it has." She looked at him steadily. "He used the word viable asterisk eventually. He does not use that word lightly." Reth was quiet. "He also said," Sevahari continued, "that if I intended to continue in this direction, which he regards as having been determined some time ago, by both parties, then he would recommend formalizing the arrangement through the Compact's Diplomatic Partnership Registry, which would provide a recognized institutional structure. He finds unrecognized structures professionally unsatisfying." "That sounds like him," Reth said. "Yes." A pause. "Reth." "Yes. I asked you a year ago why humans form lifelong bonds. You gave me the answer." She looked at him, the same look, the same steady gray violet, the same full-face Velhari attention that she had turned on him the first time in that reception hall, and had not in the subsequent year found cause to withdraw. "I want to ask you a different question now." "Ask it." "Are you—" She stopped. The stopping was rare. When she stopped now, it meant something she had been carrying a long time. "Are you the kind of person who stays?" He looked at her across the table, in the cold, clear light of the Velhari secondary station, with the trade agenda to one side and her counselor's filed concerns in the institutional record and 7 months behind them, and whatever came next in front of them. "I told you about the 3rd Reclamation Unit," he said. "I told you what their commander said when the review board asked why they stayed. We don't leave people." "Yes," he held her gaze. "That is my answer to your question." She breathed slow, deliberate, the Velhari breath of something settled. "Then I would like," she said, "to file the formal registration, if you are willing." "I'm willing." My counselor will have paperwork. I assumed he would. Extensive paperwork. I have been here 7 months, he said. I have seen the man generate paperwork. I am not afraid of it. This time the smile stayed. It had been staying longer this past year, arriving without announcement and remaining past the moment that had prompted it, which he understood now was simply what her smile did when it was real, and there was no reason to put it away. Good, she said. Then we will file it this afternoon, and it will be documented, and my counselor will organize his files around it, and we will have a framework. A pause. A Velhari framework. Built after, he agreed. She reached across the table. Her hand, long-fingered, silver-skinned, cool at the temperature the station ran, settled over his. He had explained a year ago that the bond was built in layers over time, from the accumulation of small decisions. He thought about the green cube on the table in the alcove, held for 2 hours. He thought about the window and the stars. He thought about the corridor and the door that had already been opened by the time he named it. He turned his hand over and held hers. The trade agenda waited. The counselor's paperwork was somewhere in the station's filing system, already being organized. The secondary station hummed with all the business of a place where the ordinary and the extraordinary happened side by side, which was, he thought, most places, most of the time, if you paid attention. She had asked him why humans form lifelong bonds. The answer, it turned out, was not something you could finish explaining. The answer kept going. The answer had more to say. He was looking forward to hearing the rest of it. And